Hello, good evening, welcome. Tonight on the David Ellis Report, as government gives Parliament 90 minutes to debate renewing the Coronavirus Act, dissatisfaction levels in Parliament reach a new fever pitch as Sir Charles Walker, Vice Chairman of the 1922 Conservative Backbench Committee, voices his dissatisfaction in a most spectacular fashion.
90 minutes to debate the renewal of an act that fundamentally has changed the nature of the relationship between the state and citizens is not good enough. And I have to say, if this is the portent of the promises to come, it's not good enough. I need, at some stage, more than 3 minutes to discuss the fundamental hardships that are going on in my constituency. The jobs that are being lost, the opportunities that are being lost, young people struggling to find work, to get back to university, to come back from university. 90 minutes is an utter disgrace. It is actually disrespectful to this House, and it is disrespectful to colleagues. And I'm sorry, Secretary of State, if I sound... Actually, I'm not sorry that I'm angry, because a lot of people in this place are angry. We want to see this virus beaten, of course we do, but it would be nice, just nice, if this House was shown some respect.
There's clearly a split within the Conservative Party, with some expressing anger at the government's coronavirus response, while others call for an escalation. Early today, I spoke with the Right Honourable Ann Widdecombe, former Brexit Party MEP and former Shadow Home Secretary, and Rusty Firmin, former 22 SAS. I began by asking Ann if she supports the statement that Lieutenant Colonel Tobias Ellwood made in the House of Commons, again calling for British military to be brought into the civil arena to assist with the coronavirus crisis.
No, I absolutely would not support the military assisting the police in keeping civil law in this country. It's not their role. They have got a big role to play in the COVID crisis. They've already played it by building the Nightingales in record time. And I would be perfectly happy to see them looking after the logistics of track and trace, which is going very, very badly wrong. The Army's very good at logistics. And that sort of role is fine. And any sensible person is going to welcome that. But we must not have the Army on the streets keeping civil order. That is a matter for the police. And if we haven't got enough police, that is a matter for government to address. The Army mustn't pick up the tab.
Rusty, how do you, as a ex-serviceman with senior security and military experience, how do you feel about that?
Pretty much in agreement, really, that, especially when I served, I went there to serve as a soldier, basically, and do a soldier's job. The police are undermanned, I think we know that. However, it sounds like a last chance saloon when you throw in the squaddies to go alongside the police. Why? Let's get some more police, let's get them trained up, let's get them on the streets where they belong, get round, talk to people, try to help sort it out, and let the soldiers, military, get on with their job. They've got enough on the plate, they're serving in all theatres of the world. When they come back to the UK, if they're in the UK, isn't that a time for them to have a little bit of a break and get on with their training for what they should be doing?
Yeah. It seems it's a slippery slope, isn't it, that we're heading towards fusing military and police into a paramilitary organisation. And that's definitely, Anne, something that you would not like to see.
It's something I'm quite determined should never happen. But also, I think you've got to consider what you don't want to get is is the people versus the military. And if the military are on the streets, keeping order, telling people what to do, that could set up quite a tension, which is completely unnecessary. And I don't know whose wild idea it was, but it needs to be very firmly put back in its box.
You don't think under the current circumstances that it's justified at all?
Look, if we had riots on the streets every night, and if we had civil war or something, then you might talk about the government using the military. But for heaven's sake, when all you want is ordinary effective policing, that is not a job for the military.
No. And seeing already that we've had this contradiction in the way that the policing has occurred in London between Black Lives Matter protests and the freedom protests, that there's clearly issues there already without complicating it with bringing military into the arena.
I think the other thing is the complete separation of the military from politics, if you like. The one thing soldiers don't do is have overt politics, whatever they may think privately. And therefore it would be quite wrong, for example, to have the military policing demonstrations, which always have a political angle, always. So, no, absolutely not. That is just not the military's role. But as I say, their role in logistics, their role in getting the Nightingales built, all that is good army stuff for which we can all be very grateful. But that's very different from saying that you want to see a soldier on the streets of Britain telling Britons what to do. No.
Do you agree, Rusty?
I do agree. And I think that when you look at it really, and having served in the military, our training that we do is for military jobs, military operations. We are trained totally different than the police. The police, in my opinion, have always been more passive than the likes of soldiers. I've worked in Northern Ireland, everybody knows that. And we've seen what happened there. But you can't expect to grab troops now who have been deployed everywhere and say, you're now a policeman, to assist them. They don't know enough about it. They don't know the law. And then all of a sudden you'll find that something's gone on that's too aggressive. They'll be hauled over the courts like whatever else has been going on over the past few years. And it'll all be a total waste of time. But it'll be the military that get the blame. And that's why I'm a bit worried about it. They're not police. They are soldiers and the rest of the military. They're here to protect our country, not civil order at the moment.
Not to come into civilian arena. One of the other things that Tobias Elwood mentioned was that the MOD to be involved with controlling the narrative currently under this COVID, or not that the government have called it an emergency, but under the COVID crisis, should we say. How do you feel about the MOD and 77 Brigade being involved in controlling the narrative, as he puts it?
I don't think the COVID crisis is anything for the military or the MOD or anything else to get itself involved with. This is a civil emergency. It is a worldwide emergency. There's nothing unique to Britain about this. And what we have seen at the moment is a complete absence of ministers. And we've got the Prime Minister, and we've got the Chancellor, and we've got the Health Secretary. And every so often we have an awful lot of waffle from the Education Secretary. Where's everybody else? There's an entire cabinet somewhere, and we don't see them. And it's being kept very much between a very tiny group and effectively dictated upon from Downing Street. There's very little parliamentary endorsement involved, which is why there has been such a lot of angst recently about that, about Parliament saying whether these huge civil powers should actually be exercised. I mean, the level of the fines, for example, and the ability of people being told to snitch on their neighbours. We're running a quasi-Stasi here. I mean, it's quite wrong. But that wasn't quite what you asked me. If we go back to what you were asking, has the military anything to do with the narrative? The answer is no.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. I'm delighted that you've highlighted the sort of ministers becoming, to an extent, invisible, because it looks like we've got the failure of cabinet government, and somebody that served in cabinet government. What's your take on the current situation that we don't seem to have action and resolution in any timely fashion?
Well, I think that if you went out upon the streets with a microphone at the moment and you asked people to name, say, the Secretary of State for Transport or whatever it might be, people would be very hard put, because we're not seeing cabinet government at the moment. What we're seeing is a dictatorship of a few under emergency powers. Now, there were perfectly good reasons for giving them those emergency powers at the start of the crisis, when we didn't know very much about it, when we had to take fairly stringent measures. But it's gone on too long, and you can't run a country like that. You've got to have Parliament involved. You've certainly got to have the Cabinet involved. And I think at the moment, Britain is accepting it. Every single opinion poll shows that Britain is prepared to accept this at the moment. But I don't think it can go on too long. I don't think it can become, if you like, a habit. And there are many other things that the government needs to be worrying about. Not least defence. Many other things the government needs to be worrying about. We're not hearing about it. We're hearing COVID, 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 COVID. And anything else we do hear, such as from the Education Secretary, is a spin-off from COVID. It's not about running a country in a normal way. And yet the country does have to be run in a normal way. It must be governed in the usual way. Even under a crisis such as this. Otherwise, democracy becomes pointless.
It's a very poignant take on it. I've got to draw back to something Churchill warned of, because you highlighted it there with political policing, in effect, that he warned in 1945 of if you carried on with left-wing socialist, Marxist and Communist party policy, that you would ultimately have to have political police. Is that where you see it at the moment, or are we close to it?
I don't think we're going down the road of political policing yet. I don't think we are, and I think it would be overdramatic to suggest that we were. But it's a danger that is there, because these things creep up. They don't get implemented overnight. You don't say, right, we're going to have political policing in Britain. Nobody's ever going to say that. But things creep. What you've got at the moment is definitely mission creep.
Quite. With regard to the current integrated defence review, there were seeing concerns raised by Dr. Julian Lewis, former chairman of Defence Committee, who's questioning the timing of this review now and really what its long-term strategic aims and how it's sort of going to fulfil itself. So how do you feel currently about the review taking place now during this COVID crisis?
I don't think it matters that the review is taking place during a crisis, as long as the review operates wholly independently from the crisis, is not influenced by the crisis, is not looking, if you like, at a COVID Britain for the next 3 or 4 years, but is looking at defence requirements over a much longer period, then I don't mind that it's being done in this period, except let's hear about it. All we hear about at the moment is COVID, so other things which are going on we don't hear so much about. We're not hearing about the European Defence Union. We're not hearing as to whether the government is going to stay fully committed to NATO and have nothing to do with the Defence Union, or very little. The odd joint exercise, I don't suppose anybody's going to object to. And certainly, if you think what Mrs. von der Leyen has said, and she said very clearly, and she hasn't hedged about at all, she wants one single a procurement supplier. That's what she wants. She wants one nominated for the whole of the European Defence Union. Now, that is very bad news for British defence industries, and it is crucial that the government decides what it's going to go with. Is it going to stay with NATO, which has kept us safe since the Second World War, or is it going to go with the European Defence Union? Now, it will try to have it both ways. It will say, oh, but the European Defence Union is only an option. Fine, then why are we saying we're not taking that option? Because we haven't decided not to take that option. And anything that goes on during COVID is not going to get public attention. And this needs public attention.
Yeah, agreed. Rusty, how do you feel about the current sort of defence situation?
Well, since the last time we spoke and did the interview, I don't see an awful lot has changed in the likes of somebody coming forward. Yes, we can read stuff in the newspapers. Yes, we see stuff on the TV. But what we need really is somebody to stand up and become the action man. Stand up, say it how it is. The British public will understand, rather than, as Anne said, everything is being taken over by COVID. Actually, it's a little bit of a smokescreen for the rest. They can carry on doing what they want, and nobody knows about it. That's why it's invisible, in my opinion, or one of the reasons. So let's get Action speaks louder than words. I think we all agree with that. Let's get somebody, okay, any of these members that have got the authority to stand up and tell everybody, so we're all in the clear, what's going on, why it's going on. That clears the air. At the moment, there is none of that. People are making their own minds up, some making it positively, some not. Veterans in particular would like to know what's going on. They're the ones who fought for this country to get us where we are today. Nobody wants to see us go downhill. Nobody wants to see the ED, if we were part of the EDU, nobody wants to see that possibly being under German rule. Why should we? This is our country. It's got a big G in it, which stands for great. Then we've got Britain behind it, Great Britain. That's ours. We want it, the veterans want it, and I'm absolutely convinced a lot of the public who've maybe never served want that as well. Yes, there'll be a minority who don't, but so what? This is our country, and I think we should keep it. And somebody just needs to stand up, you know, grow another 6 feet, stand above the rest of them and point it out.
One thing that's been raised to me by several officers that are of the Falklands generation, so these are back in your period, Rusty, is that they've continually had press reports of the cuts, which I don't believe are cuts, I believe they're unification, but that's another debate, about us continually taking out capability, and we would no longer be able to go and conduct anything like what we did during the Falklands crisis. So if this review doesn't sort of come back with actually increasing fighting capability, where do you sort of stand at that stage where we get to the point where we can't go off and actually conduct our own affairs adequately?
Well, in my opinion, our own affairs should be first in the line. We should be looking after ourselves first. If we can't do that, we need to seriously look at what we can do. And the way it's going, we all know with EDU, yes. Where are we going? Okay, we've got the central part of Africa is a problem. We know that they want a smaller fighting force. They know that they want to put the tanks in mothballs. But where is the positives there? Why can't they say, this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do it. This is why we're putting the tanks in mothball. It's nothing. It's just the next minute, oh, maybe they're not going in mothball. Nobody knows.
Yeah, it's not coherent, is it? Yeah.
No, but we need to be able to defend our country first. Yeah. And that is, I don't think any British person would actually disagree with that. We are first, and then we have to look at it. It is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. They wanted a quick reaction type force. Great. A quick reaction force against 1 million troops isn't that good. And I can tell you now, we're heading for trouble if we go down them lines. That's my opinion. The guys I've spoken to of my era and still looking forward to what's going on, not sticking in that era, looking at what's going on. The trouble is, how many of the military guys have we got? The senior officers, and the very senior officers, people who've served the 10, 20, 30 years plus in the military, they're the ones that should be sat on the shoulders of these politicians, not some clown that they picked up somewhere else. These are the ones who should be telling them what they should be doing and advising and making use of their experience, because they don't just go to bed when they go home. They know what's going on. But again, why don't we use the experience of all those senior guys who can then use the experience of the likes of myself and people of my level? It can't not help, instead of the bumbling buffoons just going forward and nothing happens.
And during the 1981 Knott Review, where he suggested he wanted to rebalance the British military, and those swaging cuts that then took place in the Navy, it attributed that those cuts triggered Argentina to invade the Falklands. And yet subsequent, we've had review after review where vast amounts of British tried and trusted capital assets have been taken out in each review, decade on decade. How do you feel about the situation now that if there was a problem in the Falklands, would we be able to do anything about it?
Well, obviously, that is not for me to pronounce on because I'm not top military brass, and they're presumably the people who know. But on any rational analysis, it's hard to see how we could mount the sort of operation that we mounted in the Falklands with the frigates and the fairly pathetic naval fleet that we've got today, let alone the backup, that has to go with that. It's not just a question of, well, here are the ships and here are the troops, but it's everything else that has to go into it. So it does worry me. The interesting thing is that, as you rightly say, you're pointing to the Knott Review, which was before the Falklands. But it was also, and this is what's crucial, it was also 8 years before the fall of communism. Now, the fall of communism has often been used as a reason for retrenching, for cutting down the supplies of troops, or, we don't need BAOR anymore, we don't need the sort of troops that you had for NATO exercises actually in Europe anymore. It's not the same situation, the world's at peace, everything's all right. That was the reasoning that came out post-1989. But the Knott Review was 8 years before even that. So we were already getting ourselves into the frame of mind which said the world is changing, which it was, that's fair enough, the world is changing, therefore we do not need to be as ready for response as we used to be. Now, that is an extremely dangerous philosophy because the one obvious thing is you never know where the next threat's going to come from. At the end of the Cold War, nobody foresaw the rise of Islamic State. It wasn't anywhere on the horizon. There's China. We don't know where the next threat is going to come from. We don't know where the next threat to which we must respond militarily is going to come from. Could the army now run operations in both Afghanistan and Iraq simultaneously? Well, they were hard put to do it at the time. Certainly wouldn't be able to do it now. We've run down the reserve as well, in case anybody hasn't noticed. So I think we have to stop and we have to say, look, we're not just planning for the world as it is. And I think this has got a lot to do with the debate that is going on behind closed doors about the European Defence Union versus NATO. Because NATO doesn't get involved in certain parts of the world and the European Defence Union does. And so there's a question, well, are things changing so much that we have to redirect our alliances? But that is not the only question. The bigger question, the question that any country has to be prepared for, not just Britain, is the threat that we don't know about. Now, we did an exercise in 2016, and when I say we, I mean the British government, as to how it would cope with a pandemic. There was no COVID on the horizon, it was all purely theoretical, you didn't know where the threat would be, you didn't know what the disease would be. And apparently, it is said, that the government of the day identified quite a lot of holes in the provision. What did it do about it? Nothing. And we're now doing the same thing with defence. We know that there may be a threat that we haven't foreseen. We're doing nothing about being ready to meet it. Nothing.
We need the investment and the strategic thinking now. Yeah.
We need to be prepared for the threat that we cannot identify. That's what it's about, the threat that we don't know.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But also just a quick one on that is, as I'm saying, we're not bad at being reactive, but we're not very good at being proactive. Getting ready before it happens, not waiting till it happens. Like the Falklands, that was unfortunate. But, we actually got something put together to send a task force down there. I doubt we could do that at the moment. And, it's okay taking everything away and it won't happen, it won't happen, it won't happen. You've got to be prepared at the highest level in case it does happen. And that, to anybody, if they're not thinking along those lines, I'm absolutely convinced that we're an accident waiting to happen around the corner.
I think also there's a very big psychological angle here. Gualtieri invaded the Falklands because he was convinced we wouldn't react.
Yep.
because that was the image we'd been sending out to the world. That Britain was very peaceful, that, you know, we were giving up all our territories, which was right. We were doing this, we were doing that, but we weren't a warlike nation, and we certainly weren't going to go thousands of miles across the ocean to defend a relic of empire, if you like to put it that bluntly. He was wrong. He was wrong. Thatcher said, no way, you're on our territory, get off, you know, or we'll make you go off. But if other countries think Britain hasn't really got the stomach for this, then they take advantage. Now, Galtieri miscalculated. But at this moment, of course, you know, all around the world, people are assessing what the threats are, what sort of reactions would likely follow. All that is going on, and there's a very big psychological input. And in embassies throughout London, people are writing assessments, defence attachés are writing assessments, sending them to their governments of just how resolute Britain is about her defences. And the answer at the moment is not particularly resolute at all.
Right Honourable Ann Widdecombe, former Brexit Party MEP, thank you very much indeed. Rusty Firmin, SAS, thank you very much indeed.